Hey, everybody. All right. So we're going to kind of pick up where we left off last class. And remember, we started doing this whole crash course into blocking and the whole idea of breaking down a film into all its finite component. What was that component? Everybody remember? If I break a move, what's that? Say it again.
Shots.
Yeah, shots and takes. Technically takes, but sometimes you only do one take and that's a shot. So that's the base foundation. And so for us, that's a key important element of the production process, because by isolating those takes, remember, we're going to cut in the beginning and the end of each take. That's going to create the pipeline. It's going to create a workflow that's not going to get anything lost. So when we combine keeping everything into takes or shots with using a slate, now we've created this tracking system for tracking our shots through the pipeline that we're all going to be creating, especially, for the first assignment, the real project. So it's a really important thing to understand, because if you don't track this stuff, and again, I said in the past, a small project, like maybe a student project, not that big of a deal. But imagine a big movie. Imagine a multi-episodic TV series where there are maybe hundreds, if not thousands, of shots spread across multiple days, completely shot out of order. If you don't track that stuff while you're shooting, A, you're gonna make your editor's life miserable. B, you're gonna jack up the price of your expenses, because you're gonna have to pay for extra time in post. But also, more importantly, is we're gonna break these scripts down, and we're gonna break them down into scenes, and we're gonna make our shot list and figure out exactly how many shots we're gonna need for each scene. And wouldn't it be a great way to track this all, so we know, like, okay, what scene are we on? We're on scene 23. Let's start with take one. What's take one? Well, it's going to be a master shot. Okay, that's what I wrote in my shot list, my production schedule. So this whole idea of reducing everything down to these minute little atoms of filmmaking is not just a cool philosophical thing. It's a crucial part of the process. And so people who start out in the beginning kind of not doing this, or just not understanding the process, will have a rougher time in post-production. We'll have a rougher time in production, just trying to keep track of everything. If I have every scene broke down to all the shots that I think I'm going to do in those scenes, I don't have to think too much while I'm on set. I don't have to think about, did my coverage go right? No, because I've got it listed. I've got a list of everything that I need to shoot that I've thought about prior to actually shooting. And so that just makes it much more efficient. I don't have to waste time. I don't sit there on set and go, what do you think? Should we take from this side or this side? Where should we put the main shot? Where should the blocking happen? That stuff can happen, and it does happen on set, where you're improving on the fly, but we still come up with a game plan. We still come up with how many shots we need, so that we at least have a foundation. You still can, adapt it. You can improv, you can change it and everything. That's totally fine. But having that game plan allows you the luxury of looking at it and going, let me change this up a little bit, instead of just sitting there kind of winging it on the fly. Make sense, everybody?
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out, actually, because I was afraid that if you planned everything out, that you kind of had to just rigorously stick to that, and it didn't leave any wiggle room.
No, that's not the case at all. There's massive wiggle room. But again, I'm going to take 2 steps back on that, because it all depends on the situation. It all depends on the producers and directors. Some directors, and again, I'll bring up the great Alfred Hitchcock. His whole theory of filmmaking was that once he wrote the script was written, the hard work's done. Everything else is just following the game plan. So Hitchcock did not deviate. Nothing deviated. He never threw in extra shots. It was what it was. And you may find that if you do your research or follow your favorite directors, there are quite a few directors. That's it. And I've got the shot down to a T. I blocked it out. I figured it out. That's what I'm doing. And so a lot of people who do super elaborate pre-production and pre-visualization stick to the game plan because they've already thought it out. They've already thought every single angle out ahead of time. And so when you look at the bigger productions with the, and again, I'm not going to say every director because everybody's different. Spielberg kind of follows that path, but he may be flexible. Hitchcock stayed that way. I mentioned Terry Gilliam and also David Lynch. Those two, they kind of find it sometimes. They'll come up with a game plan, but then they'll shift it to, when ideas or improv suddenly shines at that moment. So there's no right path for everything. The only wrong path is to not plan anything out, even if you throw that plan away. Because even if you don't use that plan, it still gets your brain going to figure out what you're trying to do. And that is the name of the game here. If you just think it's all going to happen magically while you're there, and it's going to also happen magically in the edit, go join all the millions of other people trying to do stuff on YouTube that looks lame, because that's the reality of it. Anytime, even in the show that I was doing, that Ice-T show, there was a lot of improv happening on set, but it was still figured out how many shots we needed. We knew exactly what we needed to fill the edit. We just didn't know exactly how we were going to shoot it because we wanted to keep that flexibility going on. But there still was weeks and weeks and weeks of pre-production done. You can't figure out what you need for each scene, right, if you don't break it down. And we're going to get into all this stuff in probably next week or the following week. I think actually next week, how to break scenes down, how to start thinking about your project in a bigger production aspect. Everybody with me so far? So, I know I sound like a broken record, but it's the truth. And I come across, producers and directors who are not prepared. They're just winging it. And guess what? 9 times out of 10, that product looks like it was winged. I had one director working with me on 1,000 Ways to Die, that show a few years ago that I shot. And this guy had everything broken down ahead of time, and he had it timed out. He literally would sit there, direct with a stopwatch and click and know exactly how long he needed to be in shooting each shot and moving on. That's how anal he was. That's how organized this guy was. And he was good. So it wasn't like, oh, this guy's being a jerk. No, he knew exactly how much time the day he had. And he figured out down to the minute almost how to break it down. And some people are like that. Other people are much more loose with everything. But in the end, everybody still preps. Everybody still tries to come up with some idea, storyboards, however you want to discuss it. The minimum shot list, minimum some form of a script in front of you. Any questions so far?
Do you think that's more effective, or did you want some wiggle room, like how he said he had it by a stopwatch? That's like really, really intricate. Do you think that helped the production, or do you think that like left out more creativity?
It helped out a lot because some of these shows, when they're, and I'm going to call them low budget, which means they're still, paying everybody, and still, there's still money there, but it's not like a big high end show. So that means he realized that he had the vision of what he wanted to shoot. And so there wasn't like, I didn't have creativity there. My creativity was kind of more contained in what his vision was. And as a DP, that's really what it's about. I'm there to support the director to get their idea out. And so the more organized they are, the more they have it down to a science, the better it is for me, because we're all on the same page. If I was directing, then it would be a different story. But as he's directing, he had it down. He knew exactly what shots. So we would talk about, he had it broken down time-wise. And at first I felt that kind of strange, but I realized that he was actually right. It was much more efficient in his workmanship. He was that organized. So he would say, here's the 10 shots that I want to get in the next, 40 minutes. And we'd look at him and go, okay, what if we do this instead of this? What if I take these 2 shots and merge them together in one? He's like, oh, okay, yeah, that'll work. And then he would rearrange his schedule. So you still got creativity. It's just more about how organized you are. Even on moving forward to an Ice Cold Blood show, we didn't have it down to the minute or a second, but we had it the blocks of time broken up. And you'll find out when we're going to actually do this, that you do need to do. You need to have it broken down and scheduled. You can say, okay, well, if I've got 12 hours in this window today to shoot, how am I going to take those 12 hours and chop them up? Well, I know that when call time is at, say, 7 o'clock in the morning, it's about 45 minutes to an hour before the whole filmmaking train is ready to go. So I know I got to block out half an hour to an hour of time in the morning to get everybody ready, all the gear built, the wardrobe people ready, the art department ready, whatever it is that needs to be ready. Takes that a block amount of time. Okay, so now I'm going to shoot my first scene. Well, now we got to think about exactly how much time I need to shoot that, because I can't say, well, I'm just going to figure it out on the fly. No, I've got a whole day's worth of shooting to do. So I need to figure out exactly like goal marks. So let's say I need to know by halfway between lunch what I need to shoot. I need to know by lunch where I need to be. And then after lunch, what do I need? And guess what? If we're on location, I need time at the end of the day to have everybody pack up the stuff and put it away and get it in the trucks and go home. So I can't just shoot until 12 hours and say, yeah, we're done. No, there's still another half an hour to 40 minutes of time for everyone to break everything up. So this whole idea of scheduling is super critical, whether you get it down to how long it takes per shot, like this guy did, or you slice it up in bigger chunks going, okay, I need to get out of this scene by 10 o'clock, and I need to be shooting the next scene by 10:15 to 11 o'clock. Those bigger chunks of time, in that time, I have room to wiggle around and do whatever I want, but I need to be done in that scene by that time. Does that kind of make sense? And so there is no right path here. It's all about, how you want to work as a director, as a producer, as a filmmaker.
It does make sense. Thank you.
Yeah. And, it all when I first started out, my scheduling skills weren't that tight. Somebody'd say, how long is it going to take to set up and shoot this? And I'd be like, 10 minutes. And in reality, it takes 40 minutes, or it takes half an hour. If I say it's going to take 10 minutes for every setup, and suddenly it takes me half an hour every time, guess what I'm doing to the schedule? I'm messing it up, because those people expected this much extra time. If I'm adding 20 minutes per setup, that turns into hours. And suddenly, if they're like, well, we were going to add an extra scene, but no, we can't do it because we're behind the clock. And even though the camera crew might be functioning full speed and working, I underestimated how long it was going to take. And so they went by my opinion, saying, oh, well, you said it was going to take 15 minutes per setup, but now it's taking half an hour. We didn't take that extra 15 minutes into account. So then it's my fault. That makes sense. So this is an important thing to kind of wrap your head around. And again, we're going to hit more about it when we get into that part of it, scheduling. But let's get back into this whole idea of blocking. So we kind of, just to recap, remember we started hitting up this idea of blocking. And remember, we talked about it all came from theater, right? Remember, in theater, the audience has one point of view, right? That's it. Whatever seat they paid for, they're in that seat. That's it. So the theater needed to move actors around to create the motion, the depth, to keep it all interesting. Imagine if everybody just stayed in one place, it would be kind of boring. So the theater uses blocking to move the actors around. Don't move the stage around because they can't. Remember, we talked cinema. Well, we use the same idea where we're going to move these actors around in frame, but now we can move the camera, right? I can truck in, I can do a crane shot, I can move the camera around, or I can move the camera around in editing. Remember, we talked about that. By cutting from a wide shot to a close-up, I've just basically teleported my audience from a seat far back in the theater to now a seat up close. Super powerful, super amazing. But blocking is always going to be more about moving the camera. And we could find out, like, editing is great, and having multiple angles is awesome. And you should strive to do that whenever you're, shooting scenes and sequences and so forth. But anytime you can move the camera, anytime you can create more depth and three-dimensionality in your cinematography, it's going to raise the bar. It's going to raise the quality of what you're doing. So if I have a shot where it's a medium shot or a medium wide shot of somebody, and then they're about to cry because something happened to them. I could cut to that close up, and would that be powerful? Yeah. But imagine instead that the camera was on a dolly and dollied in. So instead of that cut having instantaneous, we start on this wider shot and then bring the camera, which means bringing the audience into that person's personal space, right? And we get into this close up when their emotions really happening. That's pretty powerful. That's one way to look at blocking. Another way of looking at blocking would be not to move the camera. Let's say we have the camera back here, person's over there, far back in the frame, like back as far as I am, and starts, letting their emotions out and about to reveal that moment. And when they do, they just walk up to the camera and just turn like this, and maybe they're on a side angle like that, and then they start talking. So I could move the actor and create that medium wide shot and then turn it into a close-up just by moving the actor and not even touching the camera. Both are equally powerful, right? So if you think about it, there's 3 ways to do what I just described. I could do an editing, wide shot, cut to a close-up. Still works, still powerful. I can move the camera, have the actor stay in one place and move the camera towards them. Same effect, but different, right? We're drawing the audience here in. Or I can have the camera static and have the actor walk into that close-up. And now, which one is more, better? Which one has more of an effect on the audience? The actor walking up or the camera trucking in? I'm not quite sure. They're both powerful, but and it might really reflect more about what the order of your shots are, where this moment happens in the scene, that you may dictate whether or not it's a camera move or it's an actor move, or it's just an edit. So no right or wrongs here, just choices, just options on the plate, right? You go up to order your food, you've got, instead of one selection, you've got 3 selections of the same, dish. It's up to you which one you prefer. The only thing I will tell you is editing from a wide to a close-up may buy you more options down the road. You can have different choices. You could do that move, or you can have the actor walk up, but you may be locked into those if you don't have any other way out. And if you decide, well, that move of the actors wasn't good enough, the pacing didn't feel right, well, you might be stuck with it because of the move happened during the dialogue. So sometimes we may shoot extra coverage of the wide shot, cut to the close-up, and then do an alternate take where the camera trucks in, or do an alternate take where the actor walks. It all depends on how much time you have and how organized, how well you can block your actors. So this can add this deeper level of storytelling. The other thing I mentioned last class was, blocking the actors can reveal their emotions. So how they move, how they reveal themselves, what their actions are doing. Sometimes anybody ever watch a movie where the actor is saying one thing, but their body actions are showing something completely different, and they're kind of conflicting with each other? What might that tell you about your actor or that character in that scene?
That they're lying, right? Like remember last time you said they're a villain, right? They could be killing somebody while they're saying something, and then it just reveals to show who they are.
Could be that, but lying or hiding their, saying one thing, doing another thing is shows that there's internal conflict going on inside them. So instead of writing that out in dialogue, right, I could have some actor do it. What if they're like pretending to be all calm and cool doing an interrogation, right? And they're sitting here like, and I'm the person being interrogated. And I'm like, no, I know it. I swear. I don't know anything that happened to that person. And imagine if the camera, as they're talking, tilts down to their feet. And we get down to their feet are tapping like crazy on the floor. They're doing some nervous energy, right? That would tell you that there's something wrong, right? That person might be hiding something, maybe lying, right? So blocking can reveal stuff like that. The way we move the camera, the way the actor moves around, just without even having dialogue to describe what's happening, in a sense. So again, visualizing internal movements, acting out feelings, wants, and desires. We talked about this. The blocking is consistent with how characters that actually move. So the other thing too you want to consider, and I know we're recapping just a little bit, is that you want to make sure that whatever your actors are doing, whoever your character is that you've created in your story, that their actions, their movements, the way they behave or act on front of camera is real, feels real, right? We've all seen, if you watch like B or C, B level TV shows with like superheroes and stuff, like Supergirl, The Flash, any of those. A lot of times these characters move around and they act like unbelievable. Like how many people have watched an action show where they have characters like the movie 24, where they're either detectives or they're FBI, and they almost seem like they have superhuman powers, right? They can pull a gun, they could shoot something, they can flip around and do all these karate kicks and take somebody out completely. You can have like someone who weighs like 90 pounds take out someone who weighs a super strong 250-pound guy, right? And you're not saying that doesn't happen, but a lot of times that stuff doesn't feel real. It feels surreal. And I think a lot of times those shows kind of do that to make it feel less realistic. Fight scenes in TV shows might not feel real. But if you cut to a movie where they do try to portray it more realistic, then you could see how characters they're not perfect. They do make mistakes, and those character flaws, showing how they're really human inside, can add strength to the story. So we want to be aware of, one of the things that I really think about when I'm trying to take a character in a script and trying to translate them to the screen, is think about how they actually would act, how they would move, how they would react to things, and not just like, well, the story, the dialogue is written, they're going to read just the dialogue, but how do they throw those words out? How do they do that performance? And so you need to think about your characters, what they would be like as real people. And a lot of times you can use references to your own life, people and lots of directors, lots of filmmakers, that's what they do. They think about people they know and try to take bits and pieces, or take a couple different people they know and combine different pieces of them and make this little hybrid of who this character should be. And it gives you like a real kind of relationship of how you think they would react. Like, anybody here have a best friend or a good friend? You pretty much know how that person kind of reacts because you've been around them long enough, right? So the idea here is, if you're going to think about how your characters move and who they are and all that stuff, you should almost imagine them. You want to get that knowledge about them. You want to think about them to that point where you really understand how they will react in whichever situation. And all this kind of comes into pre-production, pre-development, when I'm trying to really think about who these characters are. Because a writer can write a script, right, and can put the dialogue in there and kind of brief synopsis of the characters and all this stuff, but it's really up to the director when they're turning this words on a piece of paper into cinema on a screen, to create these characters and breathe life into them. And so a lot of times that may be a collaboration between the director and the actor, and I hope it would be, because it's like we've talked about, this is all a creative collaborative process. So maybe in the beginning, as you guys are doing your table reads and going through the script, we may have conversations with your actors about who this character is and how they behave, what's their philosophy on life or their outlook on life. Are they paranoid and worried? Are they confident and assured on everything? Are they somewhere in the middle? These are things you might want to think about, so that when you create this thing on screen, this character, pulling it off the pages of the paper of the script, that it feels real. And we see this a lot with bad acting, right? Bad movies. And a lot of times they'll blame it on the actor and say, oh, well, the actor is just terrible. Not necessarily true. It could also be the director not giving them the chance to breathe, not giving them the wrong direction, forcing the character where they think the character belongs, but maybe that doesn't feel right and it doesn't work. So these are all, obviously things that take some time to develop, and not expecting everybody to be pulling this off up front. But what I am expecting is for you guys to think about these things. and realize how deep down the rabbit hole you really need to go if you're willing to make something. And again, we're talking about scripted world here. If we're in the documentary world, it's a very different story. And 9 times out of 10 in the documentary world, the people we're following are interesting to start with. We already know they're interesting people. That's why we brought cameras into their world to capture them. Reality TV, well, I kind of think that's a blend between the two. There are sometimes interesting people, but a lot of this is kind of what I'd call improv acting. You know, especially like if you go into the housewife, you know, world, those type of shows where it's just about people fighting and arguing and everything. They just find people who, that's what people are good at doing. And that's how come you see a lot of reality TV kind of like that. Finding good reasons to force characters to reveal themselves in movement. So blocking has to be believable. So yeah, you want to make sure that like the moment when the person's being, I told you about that person being interrogated and the camera tilts down, find their hands or their foot, maybe their hands are under the table and they're just kind of doing this as they're talking because they're just nervous. Those, you want it to be real. You always want to make sure it's not being pushed too hard. And so it may not seem like this stuff's about blocking, but it really is, because when you think about blocking, it's not just the camera, it's the characters. And so even though the characters, you might think blocking is just moving from point A to point B to point C, it's that, but it's also about how they perform. When do they reveal their emotions? When do they do a slight sneer to the camera that shows their inner mind working? And how do you pull that off to make it feel realistic? So these are things to think about, you know, just to keep in the back of your head as you know, go down this journey of being a filmmaker. So we kind of talked about this. So blocking, okay. So blocking can add a deeper level of storytelling, including these functions to reveal, which we talked about. So Kurosawa, who is one of the amazing directors of our time, has made some brilliant movies. In this one, High and Low, he really really demonstrates the art of blocking. He was a master, or I think he's still alive. Well, he is, yeah. No, I don't. Actually, I think he did pass away. So I think he was a master of blocking the camera. So one of the things we can do with blocking the camera is kind of reveal characters. So if you guys were looking at this, just a still frame of the scene here, is there any information you can get out of these characters here?
Are they in police? Like, it looks like the guy on the right is listening in on the conversation from the guy in the middle of the shot.
Okay, so we've got out that there's possibly police here, right? Anything else anybody can see in this shot, this freeze frame?
The guy in the background looks really stressed, or like he just learned some news that he has to give them, but they're all concentrated on something else.
Yep. Okay. So interesting how just the blocking. Who's important in this shot? Anybody can say?
I feel like they are like waiting for a message or something, because they are, or like I don't know, like.
No, you're all right. You're all right here. Who's important here?
The guy in the middle.
Why?
Yeah, I feel like the guy in the middle.
Why is he important?
I feel like he's driving the story, right? Because he's on the phone, so he's the one moving everything along, and that's why they're all focused in on him. It's obviously an important situation that they might be all they all have something to gain from it.
So you hit something that's important here. Who are they all looking at? He's in the middle, right? So I'm going to tell you the backstory of this movie real quick. And if you ever get a chance to watch it, it's a good movie. It is subtitled because it's Japanese, but it's still an awesome movie. So this guy on the phone here is the head, the CEO, the boss of a huge company. And this guy here is one of his workers. And so what happens in this movie, the plot starts out that he gets a phone call that his child was kidnapped. And the kidnappers want $1 million. And if they don't get $1 million within an hour or two, they're going to kill his kid. So that's the setup. But here's the twist. Suddenly we realize that his kid is not kidnapped. They got the wrong kid. They end up getting the kid of this guy here, who's his worker. So these are the police here, and he was all ready to give $1 million to get his child back. But now he finds out that his child's safe and there's nothing wrong. His child's not kidnapped. And we find out it's his child, well, that's kidnapped. Now the question is he still going to give the $1 million to save his worker's child, or is he not going to do that? Interesting little story here, right? A little twist on the kidnap. And so in this scene, they're breaking down who's important here. So he's important, right? And let's take a look what's going on here. If we just kind of strip it down, look at the blocking here. We've got him kind of in the center, right? Two guys, first of all, everybody's looking at him. So that draws attention. He's the guy that has to make the choice. He's pretty helpless here, but the boss here, has to make the decision. Am I going to give $1 million away to save the life of his child, or is this child worth $1 million? That's basically what it boils down to. Or maybe it was hundreds of thousands, I don't remember, but it was a huge amount of money. So everybody's revolving around him, first looking at him. That's the first thing you notice about this scene. Let me just back it up 1 second. These two are the detectives, and they've got the phone wired, and he's getting the phone call from the kidnappers right here. Notice how they put both of these two men in the middle between these two guys. So they're actually both important. This is where the story is happening here between these two. So cleverly puts him down in the foreground, has our two detectives on either side, but yet puts him in the middle, almost standing there, almost helpless looking, right? He's removed from them because he has no control over what's happening with his own kid. You see how just by blocking or framing, positioning everybody within the camera, that you could actually create this feeling and this emotion and this information for your audience? Now, do I think that most, people who are watching a movie like this can really look at this and break it down and go, oh yeah, I can see exactly what's happening here? No. But do you think it might affect them subconsciously? Absolutely. So when we start thinking about revealing people and who's what in movies, we really want to take into consideration where I put my subjects, where they are. Are they strong and in front? Or are they weak and off to the side? Are they part of the group? Or are they away from the group? These are questions that as a director or as a DP, I think about when I'm trying to frame up a shot. And specifically with a director, we're trying to block it out and see where all these characters need to be. They could have put everybody on one side here and put him over here on the other side, but I don't think that would have been as powerful, right? Because in the end, it's still about these two. These two are just supporting characters. And by having them kind of in the middle strengthens this, not relationship, but strengthens where they stand in the hierarchy of characters. Does that make sense, everybody? Any questions so far? I'll take that as a no. So again, notice they're all looking at him. Notice again, these two, if I remove the other one, these are the two who are actually important here. These two, not that important. They're just on the side. So blocking, like I said, can add a deeper level of storytelling and includes these functions. I want to combine by combining individual elements into a whole that can be read as a single evocative image. So again, let's look at I'll show you the shot 1 second. Parts of the picture each should tell their own story, but the entire arrangement has a grand unifying story too. So you could have multiple things happening in the frame, and maybe everybody's doing their own thing, but when you look at the whole thing as a whole, it tells a bigger picture. So here's Days of Heaven, right? Everybody's in their own little spot here, right? Everybody's kind of isolated, doing all their stuff. These two here, he's in the foreground here, another person there, these two over here. Here's the homestead, the big mansion here. When you look at each one of these, they're all doing their own thing, but when you bring it all together, it kind of adds this idea of everybody's isolated in this scene. They're all not together. They're all isolated doing their own thing. And so when you step back and look at it, it's kind of about being isolated. That makes sense? So how you position people can dictate that. Also, a thing about blocking is I want to control what part of the image the audience pays attention to at any given time. So moving the camera is an essential technique for filmmakers to control where they want their audience to look. Remember, close figures get more natural attention than farther ones, right? Something's close up to us, our eye's going to go there, than versus someone far in the distance. Now, again, you might say, well, wait, what if we have a shallow depth of field and I rack focus from one to the other? Well, yeah, but now I'm telling the audience by racking, say I have a close up of someone in focus and we hear someone approach behind and say, is that you, Dylan? And the camera racks to the person back there. We're basically sending a cue to the audience to go, oh, you should look back there and pay attention to what's back there because I'm bringing your focus back there. That's a way of me directing your eye. Taller figures can get more attention than shorter ones. So there's a lot of different things here. If I've got somebody really tall in a group of people, they're going to stand out. Figures facing the camera get more attention than others who face away. So it needs also be pretty simple, concepts to wrap your head around. So if I'm looking away from camera and have someone looking forward, well, our eye's going to go there. It's going to draw attention. So that's part of blocking. Where do I have someone turn away from camera? Someone forcing? Do they flip flop? Turn like this. So if my camera is I'm the camera and I'm looking, or actually I'll do it with you guys. So if here's the person looking at you guys and there's someone back here, right? You're going to pay attention to this person, right? But if this person turns and this person turns like that, who are you going to look at now? The person in the background, right? Because they're now facing camera. So by directing blocking like that, I can make my audience get directed to where I want them to look just by moving actors or turning. So the center of the frame is a more natural focal point than the sides. So that's an important thing to remember. So, we've talked about rules of third and everything, but when we're still talking about rules of third, we may put some important stuff more towards the middle because that's important. The other thing that dictates where the audience goes to, whoever talks or moves, right? So if there's a group of people standing there and someone starts speaking, that's where attention goes. Or if there's a bunch of people sitting down in a classroom and one person gets up in the back and runs out, that's where our attention's going to go to. So that's all part of blocking. Who sits where, who stands up, who starts talking first, directs the eye. So again, we can talk about lighting to help us direct the eye, depth of field, camera movement, but also blocking. Where are the actors, who does what, who's separate from everybody else, who speaks first, who moves first. Another important thing is who or where our characters look will draw our attention. So it's just like if I'm sitting here talking to you guys and I do this, what? Don't you guys want to know what I'm looking at? So we all seen it where someone looks over that way and then they cut to their point of view. Remember we talked about point of view last week? Cut to the clock, cut to the painting, cut to whatever they're looking at. So just by them turning and looking, boom, makes us want to look that way. So it throws our attention from here to the edge of the frame, and then I can cut. Or maybe when I turn like that, I pan the camera and reveal what they're looking at. So there I've combined blocking of the actor with blocking of the camera to reveal some information. So basically blocking a motion picture is going to involve deciding where and how actors will move and which line of dialogue they would deliver where. So this is even how intricate it breaks down. So when I'm going through the script and say I'm directing something, I'm going to think about their dialogue and I'm going to think, well, as I'm reading the script, I try to pre-visualize where these characters are moving in the set. And I may say, you know, at this stage in the game, I don't know what the locations are. We haven't gotten locations. We haven't got sets built, but that shouldn't stop my mind from imagining what I think it is. So I may think about, do I want this character sitting down when they talk? Or maybe there's a moment when they're about to reveal something and they stand up and talk, and I might think about that. So I may take notes in the script. And sometimes the writer may have written the stuff that, you know, Dylan stands up before he says blah, blah, blah. Because they think the writer's also pre-visualizing where these characters are moving, what their dynamics are within the scene. So for us, as a director, you need to really think about this. And even if it doesn't end up, a lot of times it doesn't evolve. It doesn't, what you think of doesn't actually mean what it's actually going to be in the end. But the process of thinking about it is what's important, because the goal is, when you go into these scenes as a director, and if you do all your homework, you're trying to pre-visualize as much as possible. You're trying to create the movie inside your head before you go out and shoot it. And the closer you can get what's in your head to what you're capable of doing, the better, obviously, of a director you are, as long as you got good ideas. Maybe a bad director and don't know it. But we'll see. We'll see after the first midterm project where everybody stands. No stress. Only kidding. But so you want to think about that level of detail in this. And I will tell you that, you know, legit directors, real professional directors, real people who take this art seriously, that's what they're doing. They're sitting there with the script and just literally envisioning it. That's what I do. I'll read the script the first time and just kind of get a feel for it. And then I'll go back and read it again multiple times, but then I'll start thinking about the scenes, and I'll actually just daydream and imagine what's happening in these scenes and start creating these images in my head. And that's kind of where great directors come from. They get this, they can see stuff, they can visualize in their head. And then the hard part is then taking what's in your head and trying to apply it to the screen. And so, yeah, if you have unlimited budget, you can envision anything in your head and put it up on the screen. But if you have limited budget, well, you still should daydream and envision it in your head, but then you got to come to the reality of what you can and can't do. So a lot of times I'll come up with ideas in my head, maybe jot notes down in the script. I'll probably jot a lot of notes in the script about what I think the characters are doing, and then go to locations when we decide, okay, well, here's where we're going to shoot the scene in this room here. Okay. And I'll go back, well, how do I take what I saw in my head and reinterpret it for this room? And that becomes stage 2. Taking your vision and trying to get it as close as possible. And that might mean you might have envisioned some more grander room or something completely different than what you have to work with. And that's okay, because then you just reinvent it. You remap it to make it work in that room. But all of this kind of goes back to visualizing what's happening ahead of time. There's a lot of pre-production that goes into this. And this is why when you look at, you know, the shooting schedule, the whole schedule from a movie being written, once it's written, to being developed and then made into a movie, development can be anywhere from 6 months to 2 years, even longer than that. It all depends on the producers and the director, but it's not impossible to have someone previs and do all this work ahead of time for years before they actually shoot their movie. It all depends on the producers and the director. Make sense so far? Anybody, any questions or thoughts? Okay. So some of these suggestions, like I said, would be in the script, but the director has freedom to alter and augment the original text as they should. More trained actors, okay, yeah, the more trained actors are during blocking, the faster principal photography would be. So we've got our idea in our head. We figure out where we want these characters moving around. I'll talk to the actors and say, okay, here's your first line. You're going to start at the top of these stairs. You're going to come down here and say your line. You're going to pause for a beat there, wait for a reaction from the other actor. Then you're going to take a step forward over here and get face to face with them. And that's when you guys are going to blow up. And that's when the fight's going to start. So that sounds like pretty simple blocking, right? So the more trained, the better an actor is, more professional an actor is, the more they're going to hit their marks, the more they're going to be better at delivering their lines where they're expected to, and that in turn is going to cause principal photography to go faster. So imagine if we've set some really complicated focus marks, right? We're doing a long lens and the camera is going to move around. And it's going to deliver this certain line on a extreme close-up. We're trying to do this all in one take. If the actor is off on their marks or does something completely different every time and throws the crew off, then guess what? The takes are going to be no good. And we have to go back from square one. So a lot of times, and you guys may probably get in this situation because, you know, who do you know? If you don't know actors, you're going to ask some friends to help you out probably, right? So when people don't know how to act and they don't know about marks and reproducing their action and their lines accurately multiple times, they make mistakes. And then when they make mistakes, so imagine if they're doing one thing in the close-up and another in the wide, well, you're going to have an edit problem there. What if they just keep missing their marks and then it's out of focus every time? Well, you're going to have to keep reshooting. So a lot of times it's much better to find some actors and have them help you who have experience, because it's gonna allow you to get your schedule done on time. We've had situations, you know, on multiple shows that I've worked on, like especially like 1,000 Ways to Die, and also more of that show, because we had so many actors that we went through, and it was a non-union gig, so there was no DGA guild members, or not DGA, SAG members. So there were no SAG actors, which was the union for actors, Stage Actors Guild. So a lot of them were what we call Craigslist specials, where the people trying to break in would come in and do scenes. And every once in a while, we'd get someone who was just so clueless that they would just blow their marks. They blow their lines constantly, to the point where we would replace them right in the middle of the shoot. We're like, all right, you're out. Let's just, you're in now. And it sounds harsh, but they were destroying the schedule. There's no way we were going to get done. So half of something shot is not better than nothing shot. It's just, you can't, if you only got part of the scene shot, well, you don't have a scene finished. So the more trained the actors are, the faster you're going to work, because they understand blocking. I've worked with actors that totally reproduce every movement. If they're holding a cup up like this and they're going to take a sip right before they talk at a certain word, they're going to do it exactly every different take. They're going to hit their marks every time. It's amazing when you work with like professional, legit actors, how good they are. And on top of it, they're still getting that emotion out, that reaction that, you know, it's important to capture on the camera. So never underestimate. If you're like, well, I'll just get all my best friends to do it, you can, and you might have to, but just be prepared to take more time than you think, because if they're not going to hit their marks, and that might mean, well, if I got actors who aren't that experienced, I may want to consider not having more that complicated blocking or camera movements where it may go out of focus too many times. I may stick to that traditional triangle coverage that we talked about last class, right? To make it easier to get it done. So all this stuff gets balanced out. And even in my level, we still think about this stuff all the time. I'm like, okay, well, how good is the talent? Are they good enough that we can be more elaborate? And the director might like, eh. And I'm like, all right, well, we're going to stick to more simpler camera blocking, because I don't want to jeopardize it. I don't want to go into overtime or worse, don't make my day. And that's the worst. If you walk away from the day shooting and you don't have everything you need, well, that's a problem. And you might be okay if you're coming back to that location the next day, but what if you're just shooting in one location for one day and the next day you're someplace else and there's no way you can go back there? It might not even be available. So all these things need to be considered in, you know, your scheduling, how you move the camera, how you block everything, depending on how your actors are. Make sense?